It was the kind of silence that had weight to it, not the peaceful quiet of a man at rest, but the hollow quiet of a house that had once held more and now held less. The Texas frontier stretched endlessly before him, raw, vast, and indifferent, the dry autumn grass bending in the cold morning wind, the cottonwood trees along the creek standing bare and pale against a sky the color of ash. It was good land. Hard land, earned through years of calloused work and stubborn patience. 40 acres of it with a solid log-built ranch house, a proper barn, a smokehouse, a well that had never run dry, and 3 horses worth their weight in anything you cared to name. It was everything a man could want. It was also, without question, the loneliest place on earth. Will pulled on his leather work gloves and stepped off the porch without finishing his coffee. The horses needed tending first. They always did. He moved through the barn with the quiet economy of a man whose mornings had been the same for 1,000 mornings. Measuring out the feed, filling the water trough from the hand pump, checking the shoes on Lady, his old gray mare, whose left foreleg had been troubling him since the last hard ride into town. He spoke to the horses in low, unhurried tones, the way frontier men spoke to animals, plainly, without embarrassment, because animals did not judge a man for needing something to talk to. After the barn, he went to the east fence, where 3 posts had been leaning dangerously since the last storm had rolled through the territory. He worked the wire with practiced hands, driving the posts deeper with a wooden mallet, the sound carrying flat and sharp across the empty land. By mid-morning he had mended the fence, split a cord of firewood, patched a gap in the smokehouse roof, and hauled water from the creek for the kitchen barrel. He worked the way he always did, steadily, silently, and alone. It was nearly noon when Dale Ruckus appeared. Dale was 67 years old, bowlegged since birth, and constitutionally incapable of silence. He had worked Red Creek Ranch for 19 years and considered that sufficient grounds to speak his mind on any subject at any hour. He wore the same battered, wide-brimmed hat he had worn for a decade, a faded canvas shirt, and suspenders that had lost most of their tension. He walked with the slow, deliberate gait of a man who had already decided what he was going to say and was simply taking his time arriving at it. "You eat anything today?" Dale asked. "Coffee," Will said, not looking up from the fence wire. "Coffee ain't food." "It is if you drink enough of it." Dale squinted out across the range and hooked his thumbs in his suspenders. Will recognized the posture immediately and braced himself. "You know what this ranch needs," Dale said. "New water pump on the south well. A woman." Will said nothing. Dale took that as agreement, which it very nearly was. The thought sat with Will longer than he intended. That evening, by the light of the oil lamp at the kitchen table, he ate salt pork and cornbread alone and stared at the chair across from him. The one that had been his mother's, always neatly pushed in, never disturbed. She had passed 2 autumns ago. He still set the table for 2 some mornings without thinking. He pushed his plate aside, found a clean sheet of paper, uncapped his ink pen, and wrote slowly and carefully, the way a man writes when the words matter. Honest rancher seeks a good-hearted woman to share a quiet frontier life. Red Creek Ranch, Texas. No pretense, just honest work, clean air, and good land. Inquiries by letter to Will Harlan via the Red Creek post office. The next morning he rode into town and pinned the notice to the church board himself, under the eye of the Lord and the postmaster both. 3 women responded. The first arrived by wagon on a Saturday, dressed for a parlor rather than a prairie. She stepped into the barn, saw the cattle brand heating in the fire, and went so pale Will genuinely feared for her health. She was back in her wagon within the hour, fanning herself with her bonnet. The second came the following week, sharp-eyed and businesslike, walking the acreage with calculating interest, asking careful questions about water rights and land boundaries. Over supper she suggested, twice, that the ranch house would make a fine boarding establishment for travelers on the Southern Trail. Will thanked her sincerely and meant it. The third letter arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by the postmaster's boy in the late afternoon. Will read it standing in the yard and then read it again. I am not seeking a husband. I will not pretend otherwise. I need honest work and safe shelter for a short while, nothing more. I can cook, mend, ride, and work without complaint. If that is of no use to you, discard this letter and I will think no less of you for it. Clara. Will stood in the yard for a long moment. The wind moved through the cottonwoods along the creek. Lady watched him from the paddock fence with calm, ancient eyes. He folded the letter carefully and put it in his shirt pocket, close to his chest. Then, for the first time in a very long while, he smiled. Will wrote back that same evening by lamplight. He kept his reply brief and plain, matching the tone of Clara's letter exactly. He told her the guest room was clean, the work was real, and the ranch was hers to judge for herself upon arrival. He made no promises beyond honest shelter and fair treatment. He sealed the envelope with wax, rode into Red Creek town before breakfast the next morning, and handed it to the postmaster without explanation. He did not mention it to Dale. He was not prepared for that conversation yet. Clara arrived 8 days later on a dusty roan mare with a worn saddle, a single saddlebag, and a pair of steady dark eyes that took in the full measure of Red Creek Ranch before she had even dismounted. She swung down from the horse with the practiced ease of a woman who had ridden long and hard and was not given to complaint about either. She looked at the fence line, the barn, the ranch house, and then at Will standing on the porch. Then she looked past him at the fence post beside the water trough. That post is rotting at the base, she said. Another week of ground frost and it will go over. Will looked at the post. He had not noticed. I'll see to it, he said. I already pulled it, she said. I passed your tool shed on the way in. I'll reset it properly after I see to my horse. That was how Clara Voss arrived at Red Creek Ranch. She was 31 years old, with thick dark hair worn in a practical braid, warm olive skin weathered honestly by sun and wind, and hands that were never idle. She had been promised once to a man named Richard Hale, a man who wore fine clothes and spoke with easy charm in town, and was something else entirely behind closed doors. Richard Hale was wanted in 3 counties. The charges included robbery, intimidation, and worse things that frontier law was slow to name and slower to punish. He had hidden all of it beneath a surface of wealth and respectability, and Clara had believed the surface until the night she found his wanted poster folded inside his coat pocket and understood, with terrible clarity, exactly who she had agreed to marry. She left before dawn the following morning. She took her roan mare, her saddlebag, and her grandmother's handwritten recipe journal, a small, thick book with a cracked leather cover and pages soft from years of use. She took nothing that belonged to Richard Hale and left no word behind. None was owed to a man like that. She was not broken. She was guarded the way a person becomes guarded when trust has been used as a weapon against them. At Red Creek Ranch, she asked for nothing beyond what had been agreed. She cooked over the iron stove with quiet authority, frontier food, simple and extraordinary, that filled the ranch house with warmth and smell that Will had not known since his mother was living. She worked the land alongside him each morning without being directed, learning the rhythm of the ranch with sharp, unhurried intelligence. They fell into an honest frontier routine. Dawn chores together, the land worked side by side, supper by the fire each evening with conversation that began in short, careful sentences and gradually grew longer and easier. She made him laugh on the 3rd day. By the end of the 2nd week he had stopped counting. There was no pretense between them. The frontier did not allow for pretense. The work was too real, and the days too long and the firelight too honest for either of them to perform anything other than exactly who they were. Will felt it first, the slow, certain shift of something changing inside him, quiet and inevitable as a season turning. He said nothing. He was afraid of reading the land wrong and planting something in ground that wasn't ready. Clara felt it too, though she held it at a careful distance. She had arrived with her walls fully constructed, but Red Creek Ranch had clean air and honest work and a cowboy who never once asked her for more than she had offered. Her walls, built for a different kind of man entirely, found nothing to defend against. She laughed more freely. She talked about her grandmother, about the recipe journal, about small frontier memories she had not spoken aloud in years. Then on a cool afternoon in the third week, a rider appeared on the southern road. Clara saw him from the paddock and went absolutely still. The man rode a black horse and wore dark clothes, and carried himself with the loose, unhurried confidence of someone who had never once in his life been told no and made to believe it. He was handsome in a hard, sharp way. Richard Hale, wanted in 3 counties, looking not the least bit like a wanted man. He dismounted at the gate with an easy smile and spoke to Clara warmly, as though no time had passed and nothing had happened. Then he turned to Will and drew him aside toward the barn with a hand briefly on his shoulder, the gesture familiar and calculated. "She runs," Richard said quietly, his voice smooth as river water. "Town to town, man to man. It is simply her nature, friend. I am telling you this kindly, to save you the grief of finding it out yourself." Will looked at him without expression and said nothing. That evening, Clara sat across the supper table with a still face and eyes that had gone somewhere distant. She had heard enough from the yard. She believed what guarded people always believe when trouble follows them, that she was the cause of it, that her presence had carried danger into a place that had been peaceful without her. She excused herself before the fire had burned low. Will sat alone by the dying embers and told himself he would find the right words in the morning. He would speak plainly, the way the frontier demanded. But when he rose before dawn and walked into the front room, her saddlebag was packed and standing upright beside the door. And the door was already open. The cold hit Will the moment he stepped through the open door. The frontier sky before dawn was vast and ink-dark, pierced through with more stars than a man could count in a lifetime of trying. The air smelled of frost and dry grass, and the distant wood smoke of neighboring homesteads still hours from waking. The porch boards were cold beneath his boots as he stepped outside and found her. Clara stood in the yard beside her roan mare, already saddled, the leather straps buckled with quiet efficiency, her saddlebag tied behind the saddle with the careful knots of a woman who had packed and left before and knew exactly how it was done. She was not crying. She stood straight and composed in the starlit dark, her breath coming in small visible clouds, her dark eyes steady. She had the look of someone who had made a decision and was resolved to honor it before the sun rose and made everything harder. Will went back inside without a word. Clara heard the door close behind her and exhaled slowly into the cold air. She told herself this was right. Clean departure before dawn, no trouble left behind, no debt unpaid. She was good at this. She had learned to be. The door opened again. Will crossed the porch and came down the steps carrying 2 tin mugs of coffee, steam rising from both in pale curling ribbons against the cold dark air. He crossed the yard unhurried, handed 1 mug to Clara without ceremony, and then sat himself down on the bottom porch step like a man who had nowhere else in the world to be. He wrapped both hands around his mug and looked out at the horizon where the first impossible thread of gold was beginning to separate the earth from the sky. Clara stood holding the tin mug, completely disarmed. "You fixed my fence post," Will said quietly, his eyes on the horizon. "Might as well fix the rest of the place." The silence that followed lasted several long seconds. Then Clara laughed, sudden and genuine and completely unguarded, the kind of laugh that escapes before a person can decide whether to allow it. It softened into something quieter, and her eyes filled without her permission. She looked at the tin mug in her hands, then at the man sitting on the porch step with the patience of someone who had worked hard land long enough to understand that good things could not be rushed. She walked across the frost-cold yard and sat down beside him. They watched the sky change the way people watch something rare, giving it their full and unhurried attention. Gold bled slowly into rose, then amber, then the broad pale blue of a Texas frontier morning. The horses stirred in the paddock. Somewhere along the creek the cottonwoods caught the first light and turned briefly, beautifully silver. "I heard what he said to you," Clara said at last. "At the barn. I reckoned you might have." "He wasn't entirely wrong," she said quietly. "I have run. Every time trouble found me I told myself I was protecting others. Truth is I was protecting myself." Will turned and looked at her directly in the growing light. "He said you'd leave because leaving is your nature." He paused, choosing his words with frontier plainness. "Said it like it was your failing. Never occurred to him that every place you left simply wasn't worth the staying." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she told him something she had not told another living soul. The notice on the church board, she had not found it herself. She had stopped at the Red Creek Church only to rest her horse on the long, uncertain road away from Richard. She had gone inside briefly for the warmth and the quiet, and she had seen Will's handwritten notice pinned there beneath a hymn schedule and a harvest supper announcement. She had almost kept riding. That night, stopping at a way station 10 miles south, she had opened her grandmother's recipe journal as she always did when she felt most lost. The journal had fallen open to an entry written in her grandmother's small, careful hand, the ink faded but perfectly legible. It read simply, "When you do not know where to go, go where the work is honest and the air is clean." Clara had written her reply by candlelight before the way station fire had burned to ash. She had expected nothing from it. A roof for a few weeks, honest labor, clean frontier air. She had not expected a rotting fence post she could not walk past without fixing. She had not expected mornings that felt like breathing again. She had not expected a cowboy who brought 2 mugs of coffee at dawn instead of reasons to stay, and let the coffee make the argument for him. Richard returned the following morning, riding his black horse with recovered confidence, his expression arranged into something between apology and authority. Will was at the gate when he arrived, standing easy, shoulders relaxed, hat pushed back on his head, one boot resting on the lower fence rail. He looked like a man enjoying a quiet morning and nothing more. He spoke to Richard briefly and without heat, in the low, unhurried voice of someone who has already decided how a thing will go and sees no reason to raise his voice about it. Richard's confidence shifted almost imperceptibly. He looked once past Will toward the ranch house, as a man looks at something he has already lost, then looked back at the cowboy standing at the gate with the simple and immovable certainty of a fence post set in good deep ground. Richard Hale rode away down the southern road and did not look back. Dale watched the entire proceeding from the corner of the barn with his arms folded and his mouth, for once in 67 years, completely closed. 6 months passed the way good frontier seasons passed, full of hard work and small honest moments, and the gradual unannounced feeling that life had arranged itself correctly at last. Clara's grandmother's recipe journal lived on the kitchen shelf now, its cracked leather spine facing outward, its pages soft and frequently turned. The ranch house smelled of cooking and wood smoke, and something that had no name but felt very much like home. The horses knew Clara's footsteps. Dale had developed strong opinions about her cornbread, all of them favorable, expressed at every meal whether invited to or not. On a warm evening in early spring, Will and Clara sat together on the porch watching the last gold light of the day pull slowly behind the western ridge. 2 rocking chairs moved in easy rhythm. Below in the paddock the horses grazed in the long, quiet shadows. Dale's lamp glowed in the foreman's cottage at the edge of the property. Inside the ranch house, supper stayed warm on the iron stove. He had pinned a notice on a church board looking for a wife. Fate had sent him something far greater, a partner, a home, and a love that neither of them had ever thought to find. And the empty rocking chair was empty no more.